The Atlantic stretched wide and silver beyond the glass walls of the penthouse, its surface catching the late afternoon sun like molten steel, casting a brilliant, almost blinding glow across a world built entirely on the fragile foundations of extreme wealth and curated silence. From the terrace of his new residence in Banana Island's most coveted waterfront estate, Jeremy Henderson stood perfectly still, a silhouette of quiet grief and immense unspoken power, listening to a city that never quite slept. He had chosen this exclusive sanctuary for its quiet reputation, its ultra-wealthy, ultra-discreet neighbors, its manicured lawns, private docks, and a clubhouse designed in polished marble and smoked glass that shielded the elite from the harsh realities of the world outside. The estate was known for housing tech founders, oil executives, ambassadors, and those rare, deeply private old money families who valued silence just as much as they valued their multi-million-dollar fortunes. And silence was precisely what Jeremy needed more than anything else in the world. London had become too loud, too watchful, too full of haunting memories and the suffocating weight of a tragedy that had shattered his soul. He inhaled the briny, warm air of Lagos, trying to wash away the lingering cold of his past, and turned back into the expansive apartment, where professional movers were meticulously placing a pristine Steinway grand piano near the floor-to-ceiling window exactly as instructed. This magnificent instrument was the only possession he truly cared about anymore. His numerous international awards, framed magazine covers, and platinum records were already boxed up and stored completely out of sight. Useless monuments to a life that no longer brought him peace.
Daddy!
Clara's bright, melodic voice suddenly echoed from down the marble hallway, instantly breaking the heavy silence that threatened to consume him. He followed the sound to find his 8-year-old daughter kneeling on the glossy tile floor, surrounded by a mountain of unopened cardboard cartons, her dark curls bouncing energetically as she looked up at him with unadulterated excitement shining in her innocent eyes. "Can I explore downstairs, please? I saw a massive swimming pool when we drove in, and it looks so beautiful." Jeremy's lips twitched into a rare, gentle smile, despite the heavy weight in his chest, marveling at how Clara had adjusted to this massive relocation far better than he had, proving that children possess a resilient grace that allows them to move forward without overthinking geography or attaching perpetual grief to a new home. "Not alone, sweetheart," he replied softly, his voice carrying the deep warmth of a father whose entire universe revolved around this one fragile life. "We will explore this place together." She sprang to her feet instantly, grabbing his hand without a single shred of hesitation, her small fingers locking into his. Jeremy Henderson had spent decades conducting grand orchestras in the most prestigious concert halls across Europe, commanding absolute attention from rooms filled with the highest tiers of global power and prestige. Walking through the estate's central courtyard with his daughter's small hand in his felt strangely more intimidating than any world-class performance he had ever delivered. He could feel the heavy, invisible eyes of high society shifting toward them, because in a community this insanely exclusive, newcomers were always treated as a fascinating spectacle to be measured and judged. The clubhouse loomed directly ahead, a sleek architectural masterpiece of towering marble pillars and tinted glass, where soft instrumental jazz floated seamlessly through the conditioned air, and staff in tailored uniforms moved with quiet, robotic efficiency. Clara enthusiastically tugged him forward into the grand lobby, and that was the exact moment he saw her, standing near the far end of the room speaking to a concierge. The very first thing Jeremy noticed was her posture. It was impossibly straight, her chin lifted with the unconscious royal grace of someone who had been meticulously trained to command a stage and demand absolute submission from anyone who dared to look at her. Her name was Miranda Amando, though he did not know it yet, but her mere presence seemed to immediately alter the temperature of the entire room, turning the warm afternoon into something sharp, cool, and electrifying. She wore a structured, pristine ivory jumpsuit that fit her flawlessly, as if it had been carefully sculpted around her slender body by a master artist, her dark hair pulled back into a sleek, low bun that emphasized her razor-sharp cheekbones and eyes that seemed almost too observant, too piercing for comfort. In one hand she held a heavy leather portfolio containing the blueprints of her corporate empire, and in the other, a luxury phone she glanced at with an expression of cool, unwavering efficiency. She was not smiling, her face a mask of beautiful, unyielding stone, and yet she was absolutely breathtaking, radiating an aura of untouchable success that immediately set her apart from the idle rich around her. Jeremy stopped walking entirely without even realizing it, his feet freezing on the polished floor as Clara bumped gently into his leg, her eyes following her father's intense gaze until she looked up at Miranda, whispering with exaggerated, childhood drama. "Oh, Daddy, she looks incredibly important." Jeremy exhaled slowly, the air leaving his lungs a quiet rush as he realized that important wasn't even the right word to describe her. Unreachable felt infinitely closer to the truth. Miranda finished her conversation with the concierge and turned slightly, her sharp eyes sweeping the lobby in a quick, calculated assessment of her surroundings until they paused directly on Jeremy for half a second longer than polite social acknowledgement required. Her expression did not soften in the slightest, instead it sharpened, her gaze flicking down to Clara's casual clothes, then back up to Jeremy's understated appearance, measuring his worth, judging his presence, and instantly dismissing him as just another wealthy resident who had achieved nothing of true substance. She walked past them without uttering a single word, the faint, intoxicating scent of something floral and incredibly expensive trailing behind her like a royal shroud, leaving Jeremy standing there with a pulse that refused to slow down. "Daddy," Clara murmured, tilting her head with deep confusion. "Why do you look like you completely forgot how to talk?" He huffed a quiet, self-deprecating laugh, but his heart was pounding against his ribs, because while he had been thunderstruck before by adoring audiences, critical acclaim, and global standing, this feeling was entirely different. It was instinctual, immediate, and terrifyingly dangerous. Miranda Amando did not have a single second to waste on unexpected distractions, because her luxury brand Golden Carousel had just secured a historic partnership with a massive international department store, cementing her status as an absolute titan in the world of high-end design. Her brand, a meticulously curated collection of handcrafted educational toys, heirloom dolls, and artistic play installations made from sustainable materials, had become the ultimate status symbol among elite families who wanted nothing but the absolute best for their children. She had built this multi-million-dollar empire entirely herself, brick by brick, contract by contract, refusing to take on predatory investors, avoiding inherited safety nets, and accepting absolutely no favors from the corrupt or the powerful. After abruptly retiring from the world of contemporary dance at the absolute height of her legendary career in Berlin, she had returned home with one singular unshakable goal in mind: absolute ownership and complete control over her own destiny. Vowing that she would never again place her financial stability or emotional well-being in someone else's hands. As she exited the grand clubhouse and walked toward her waiting luxury SUV, her brilliant mind involuntarily replayed the brief, charged encounter in the lobby, recognizing the man instantly despite his casual demeanor. Jeremy Henderson, the reclusive, globally renowned composer with a famously tragic backstory, a broken widower whose haunting, emotionally devastating symphonies had earned him international accolades and a legendary reputation. Intellectual articles always described him as a brilliant, brooding, and emotionally complex genius, but Miranda had absolutely zero interest in emotionally complex men, and single fathers were an absolute non-negotiable boundary for her. She had spent years of agonizing work reclaiming total control of her life, and romance was a messy, unpredictable variable that required compromise, demanded vulnerability, and forced people to bend, and Miranda Amando absolutely refused to bend for anyone. Yet, as she reached her vehicle and opened the heavy driver's door, she hesitated for a fraction of a second, the image of his daughter flashing in her mind. The child's wide, curious eyes had lingered on her with such unfiltered, genuine admiration that it scratched against the armor around her heart. Miranda exhaled a sharp, frustrated breath and shook the unwanted thought away, telling herself firmly that other people's children and other people's broken families were absolutely not her problem to solve. 3 days later, however, fate refused to cooperate with her desire for distance, and Jeremy found himself standing right inside the flagship boutique of Golden Carousel, telling himself a beautiful lie that he was only there for Clara's sake. The boutique itself was an absolute marvel, unlike any traditional toy store on the planet, with bright sunlight streaming through towering windows, illuminating hand-carved wooden trains, artisan puppets, and intricate musical instrument kits arranged like priceless gallery pieces against walls that smelled faintly of rich cedar wood and sweet vanilla. Clara wandered ahead, completely mesmerized by the magic of the space, and that was when Miranda appeared from behind a magnificent display, looking even more arresting up close, her gaze direct, unwavering, and sharp enough to cut through glass. "Can I help you with something?" she asked, her voice professional but distinctly edged with a warning that screamed she did not tolerate idlers in her establishment. Jeremy cleared his throat, trying to regain his characteristic composure under her intense scrutiny, and replied gently, "My daughter saw your store from the courtyard and desperately wanted to see the inside." Miranda's eyes shifted down to Clara, and in that exact moment something incredibly subtle changed in her demeanor. It wasn't warmth, not yet, but a profound, respectful awareness as Clara approached her, shyly, looking up with awe. "Are you the brilliant owner who created all of this?" Clara asked, her voice filled with pure wonder, and Miranda nodded once, replying quietly, "Yes, I am." Clara's face instantly lit up with a breathtaking smile as she looked around the room and said, "It is absolutely beautiful, because everything in here looks like it actually matters." Miranda blinked, completely caught off guard by the profound depth of the child's words, her icy exterior fracturing for a split second as she murmured, "It does matter, very much." Jeremy watched this quiet exchange with an unexpected deep tenderness swelling in his chest, watching this untouchable razor-sharp woman crouch down slightly to match Clara's height, using her precise but surprisingly gentle movements to explain how a handcrafted wooden music box functioned. There it was, hidden beneath the steel and the corporate fire, a buried well of profound sensitivity that she guarded with her very life. When she stood back up to her full height, her eyes locked onto Jeremy's gaze with an intense, challenging energy, and she said coolly, "You are entirely new to this estate, Mr. Henderson, and you should know that we value privacy above all else here." "So do I, Miranda," he responded, the use of her first name causing a visible spark of tension to crackle through the air between them, a tension that was not hostile but deeply, dangerously charged. Miranda folded her arms tightly across her chest, refusing to back down as she said, "I assume you will be staying here long term, or is this just a temporary escape from your past?" "I am staying permanently," Jeremy answered, his voice dropping to a low, steady register that promised he was not a man who could be easily intimidated or run away when things became difficult. "Then welcome to the estate," she said evenly, though the words sounded infinitely more like a calculated challenge to a duel than a genuine greeting. Clara tugged hard on Jeremy's sleeve, breaking the spell, and pleaded, "Daddy, please promise me we can come back here every single week." Jeremy's answer came before he could even think to stop himself. His eyes locked firmly onto Miranda's as he replied, "Yes, Clara, I think we absolutely will." Miranda did not smile, but something deep within her piercing eyes shifted dramatically. It wasn't acceptance, and it certainly wasn't an invitation, but it was a profound, terrifying recognition that Jeremy Henderson did not belong in her carefully controlled, perfectly insulated world, yet he had just stepped directly into it, and she had the deeply unsettling, dangerous feeling that he had absolutely no intention of leaving anytime soon. The fragile peace that Jeremy and Miranda had quietly built over sketches of hand-carved instruments and shared silences in the late-night quiet of Golden Carousel was shattered with the terrifying speed of a tropical storm. It began on a humid Thursday morning, when the polished corporate elegance of the waterfront estate was pierced by the sudden appearance of legal couriers, private security details, and a malice so calculated it could only come from a wounded ego. Lucas Bennett, having realized that his wealth, his international connections, and his hollow promises of global expansion could not buy Miranda's submission or force her into a transactional marriage, had decided to deploy a scorched earth strategy to utterly destroy everything she had built. He did not merely want to compete with Golden Carousel, he wanted to reduce it to ash, to humiliate Miranda publicly, and to prove to the entire elite community of Banana Island that anyone who chose emotional risk over his financial security would be thoroughly crushed. Lucas had quietly spent the last 48 hours buying out the primary supply chains that Miranda relied on, weaponizing his immense inherited capital to sign exclusive, predatory contracts with the multi-generational European artisans who handcrafted Golden Carousel's signature educational toy line. By noon, Miranda's tablet was flooded with urgent, panicked emails from her partners in Germany and Austria, informing her that their manufacturing capacities had been legally monopolized by a new umbrella corporations entirely controlled by Bennett Holdings. The malicious intent crystallized completely when a formal cease and desist letter arrived at her boutique, alleging that the upcoming collaborative music-themed toy line she had designed alongside Jeremy was a blatant infringement on an obscure, pre-existing patent that Lucas had hastily acquired from a defunct entertainment firm. It was a baseless, corporate ambush designed to paralyze her business, drain her financial resources through endless litigation, and force her to her knees in front of the entire high society that watched her every move. Miranda stood behind the polished mahogany counter of her boutique, her spine impossibly straight, but her hands tightly gripped the edges of the wood until her knuckles turned a stark, bruised white as she read the legal documents detailing the total freeze of her inventory. Lucas Bennett entered the boutique moments later, the heavy glass doors swinging shut behind him with a dull thud that sounded like a prison cell locking, his face wearing an expression of smooth, unbothered arrogance that made her blood run cold. "You look stressed, Miranda," Lucas said, his tone dripping with a terrifying, patronizing warmth, as he casually adjusted his gold cufflinks and stepped closer to the counter, entirely unbothered by the sheer cruelty of his actions. "This is a low, cowardly ambush, even for you, Lucas," Miranda replied, her voice remarkably steady, cutting through the vanilla-scented air of the boutique like a diamond blade, though a fierce, painful fire was raging behind her ribs. "I told you before that I am a practical man, Miranda," he whispered, leaning forward, his eyes devoid of any real human empathy, calculating her ruin as if it were a simple line on a balance sheet. "Practical people do not allow valuable assets to be wasted on sentimental nonsense with a broken, grieving musician. You thought you could build an empire on pure independence, but the truth is, you only exist in this space because the elite allow you to, and the moment you rejected my partnership, you proved you lack the discipline to survive at the top. I can make all of this disappear by tomorrow morning. I can restore your suppliers, drop the patent lawsuits, and give you the global stage you deserve. But the price remains the same: absolute corporate submission, and a public announcement of our personal engagement at the upcoming estate gala, or I will ensure that by the end of the month, Golden Carousel is completely bankrupt, its reputation ruined, and you are cast out of Banana Island with nothing but your pride." Miranda felt a suffocating weight pressing down on her chest, the haunting ghosts of her past betrayal in Berlin suddenly clawing their way to the surface, reminding her of the humiliation, the whispering crowds, and the crushing feeling of having her destiny stolen by a powerful man. Before she could voice her defiance, the door opened once more, and Jeremy stepped into the boutique, holding Clara's hand, his sharp eyes instantly taking in the rigid posture of Miranda and the predatory smirk on Lucas's face. He did not hesitate. He gently guided Clara toward the back play area, instructing her to stay there, and then walked directly into the center of the room, his presence immediately shifting the energy, bringing that characteristic unyielding calm into the heart of the corporate storm. "Is there a problem here?" Jeremy asked evenly, his voice low and dangerous, his eyes locked onto Lucas with a profound quiet strength that refused to acknowledge the billionaire's supposed superiority. "Ah, the brooding maestro arrives right on cue," Lucas sneered, turning slightly to look at Jeremy with a mixture of intense amusement and deep contempt, though his posture stiffened slightly under Jeremy's steady gaze. "I was just explaining to Miranda the harsh realities of high-stakes business, a world where beautiful symphonies and emotional honesty cannot pay the legal fees or secure international supply chains, so I suggest you take your daughter, return to your piano, and leave the real world to the adults who actually control it." Jeremy did not flinch. He did not raise his voice, and he did not display a single shred of the chaotic anger that Lucas was desperately trying to provoke. Instead, he stepped closer to Miranda, his shoulder brushing against hers, offering a silent, unshakable wall of solidarity that deeply infuriated the antagonist. "Miranda's business is built on a foundation of absolute integrity and genuine artistry, things that your inherited wealth can never replicate or truly understand, Mr. Bennett," Jeremy said, his words falling with the heavy, deliberate weight of a judge passing sentence. "You can buy out suppliers, and you can manipulate legal systems to satisfy your wounded pride. But you cannot buy the loyalty of the people who believe in her vision, and you certainly cannot force her to bend to a transactional lie." Lucas's face darkened, the smooth mask of arrogance slipping for a fraction of a second to reveal a vicious, petty malice that made the air in the boutique turn toxic. We will see how long that noble sentiment lasts when the courts seize this property and the entire country watches Golden Carousel collapse into absolute irrelevance. Lucas hissed, stepping back toward the exit, his eyes flashing with a promise of total destruction. Enjoy your little moral victory while you can, Henderson, because by the night of the charity gala, Miranda will either be standing by my side as my partner, or she will be completely ruined, and there is absolutely nothing your music can do to save her. The heavy glass doors closed behind him, leaving a suffocating, charged silence in the boutique, where the handcrafted wooden toys and colorful play installations suddenly felt like fragile targets in an impending war. Miranda closed her eyes, a single involuntary tremor running through her frame, as the sheer injustice of the situation threatened to break her meticulously constructed spirit. She had played by every rule, she had built her business without a single favor, and yet, because she chose to protect her heart and choose a real honest love over a corporate transaction, she was being subjected to total financial execution. Jeremy turned to her, his hands gently rising to rest on her shoulders, his touch warm and steady, anchoring her in the midst of the chaos. "We are not going to let him destroy you, Miranda," he whispered fiercely, his eyes shining with an absolute unyielding devotion that sent a sudden, desperate jolt of hope straight through her fracturing armor. "This is not the end of Golden Carousel, and it is certainly not the end of us. He thinks wealth is the ultimate weapon, but he has no idea what happens when he forces a composer to fight for the people he loves." The days following the confrontation inside Golden Carousel resembled a slow, suffocating siege as Lucas Bennett deployed the full, unyielding weight of his multi-million-dollar empire to systematically isolate Miranda Amando from the very community she had helped elevate. Through a series of calculated leaks to high society publications and whispers echoing across the polished marble floors of the estate clubhouse, Lucas spun a vicious, fabricated narrative that portrayed Miranda's brand as financially unstable and legally compromised due to gross intellectual property theft. Elite families who had once proudly displayed Golden Carousel's handcrafted heirloom dolls and artisan music boxes in their children's custom playrooms began quietly canceling their long-term orders, terrified that being associated with a heavily litigated brand would tarnish their own carefully curated social standings. The bustling flagship boutique, once filled with the warm laughter of children and the gentle, comforting scent of cedar wood and vanilla, fell into an agonizing, echoing silence that ate away at Miranda's soul, while her bank accounts were rapidly drained by mounting legal defense fees required just to keep the predatory patent lawsuits from shutting her down completely. Yet, while the public face of Golden Carousel languished under the weight of this artificial scandal, Lucas Bennett openly celebrated his impending victory, reserving the most exclusive VIP lounge at the estate's waterfront clubhouse to host lavish dinners for oil executives and foreign diplomats, loudly proclaiming to anyone who would listen that true power always dictates terms to sentimentality. He took immense sadistic pleasure in watching Miranda's isolation grow, instructing his private security details to park their black luxury vehicles directly outside her boutique, a constant, menacing reminder that his suffocating influence was everywhere, watching her every move and waiting for her inevitable, broken surrender. But beneath this surface-level ruin, hidden entirely from the arrogant eyes of the high society elite, a quiet, meticulously planned counter-offensive was being orchestrated in the dead of night within the soundproof walls of Jeremy Henderson's penthouse. Jeremy refused to let the woman he loved be crushed by the hollow arrogance of inherited wealth, and while Lucas believed that a reclusive composer was entirely powerless in a world governed by aggressive corporate strategies, he had completely underestimated the vast, global network of discreet old money families and influential international cultural ministers who owed their personal legacies to Jeremy's musical genius. Working in absolute secrecy alongside a premier international investigative firm, Jeremy spent long, sleepless nights tracking the complex, shadowy financial paper trail that Lucas had used to violently buy out Miranda's European artisan supply lines, discovering a massive, highly illegal pattern of corporate espionage, bribery, and hidden offshore transactions that Lucas had used to bypass international trade regulations. Every single piece of damning evidence, every falsified document, and every recorded instance of Lucas's underhanded tactics was carefully compiled into a devastating legal dossier, hidden safely away inside a custom, handcrafted music box prototype that Clara had lovingly designed for Miranda. The tension within the ultra-exclusive community reached a fever pitch as the night of the annual charity gala approached, an event where the entire social hierarchy of Banana Island would gather under crystal chandeliers to witness either the total submission or the public execution of Golden Carousel. Lucas Bennett was entirely confident that Miranda would break under the immense psychological pressure and accept his transactional engagement proposal on stage to save her life's work, completely unaware that Jeremy's quiet persistence had laid an inescapable legal trap right beneath his expensive tailored shoes. As the final hours tick-tock away, the sheer injustice of the villain's triumphant celebration contrasted sharply with the silent, unwavering dignity of the protagonists, keeping the invisible audience in absolute suspense as the narrative hurtled toward a shocking, irreversible confrontation where the true power of hidden wealth and unyielding loyalty would finally be revealed. The grand ballroom of the Banana Island waterfront estate shimmered like a temple of absolute arrogance under the blinding light of a dozen massive crystal chandeliers, casting a deceptive glow over the ocean of elite guests who had gathered for the annual charity gala. The air was thick with the scent of expensive champagne, heavy floral arrangements, and the suffocating electricity of an impending public execution, as the entire high society crowd stood in small, whispering circles, their eyes darting expectantly toward the main entrance. Lucas Bennett stood near the center of the room like a triumphant king, dressed in a bespoke velvet tuxedo, a glass of vintage wine in his hand as he openly absorbed the sycophantic praise of tech founders, oil executives, and foreign ambassadors who believed they were witnessing the final act of Miranda Amando's independent empire. When Miranda finally entered the ballroom, a sudden, dramatic silence rippled through the crowd. She was breathtakingly beautiful in a structured ice-white gown that clung to her frame with effortless majesty, her posture impossibly straight and her chin lifted high, refusing to give the vultures the satisfaction of seeing her break. Lucas's eyes flashed with a predatory, sadistic satisfaction as he smoothly cut through the crowd to intercept her, leaning close with a patronizing smirk that made the surrounding air turn toxic. "I see you chose white for your surrender, Miranda," Lucas whispered, his voice dripping with venomous arrogance as he glanced around the watching room. "Look around you. Your suppliers are gone, your boutique is empty, and your legal fees are eating you alive. So stop this foolish, dramatic resistance and take my hand before I decide to let you drown completely." Miranda did not flinch, her piercing eyes staring directly into his hollow soul as she replied with an unyielding, razor-sharp calm. "I told you before, Lucas, I do not negotiate with thieves or cowards, and tonight, everyone in this room will finally see exactly what you are." Before Lucas could unleash a furious retort, the gala host stepped up to the microphone, loudly inviting Lucas Bennett to the stage to accept an honorary award for his massive financial contributions and his newly announced International Children's Luxury Expansion Initiative. Lucas smoothed his lapels and walked up the steps with an insufferable global confidence, the applause from the elite crowd echoing off the high ceilings as he took his place behind the podium, ready to announce his forced transactional engagement to Miranda and cement his total ownership over her life's work. But just as he opened his mouth to speak, the crystal chandeliers suddenly flickered, the celebratory jazz music abruptly died, and a heavy, thundering silence fell over the entire ballroom as Jeremy Henderson walked through the back doors of the hall. He was not dressed for a performance, but his presence was absolutely commanding, radiating the immense, terrifying power of old money and unshakable truth as he carried a sleek, handcrafted wooden music box directly toward the technical AV stage. Lucas's face instantly twisted into an expression of deep, public contempt as he barked into the microphone. "Security, remove this unstable musician immediately. This is an exclusive event for serious innovators, not a place for irrelevant, grieving artists to beg for attention." Jeremy did not stop walking, his eyes locked onto the stage as he plugged a custom digital drive hidden within the music box directly into the grand projection system, his low, steady voice cutting through the microphone feedback like a judge's gavel. "I am not here to perform, Mr. Bennett. I am here to present the actual blueprints of your so-called international expansion," Jeremy announced, his words falling with absolute devastating weight. In an instant, the massive 30-foot digital screens towering over the main stage flashed to life. But instead of displaying Lucas's corporate logo, They revealed a highly detailed, undeniable dossier of leaked financial documents, offshore banking records, encrypted emails, and wiretapped transcripts that Jeremy's global legal team had uncovered in the dead of night. The entire ballroom gasped in unison, a collective wave of absolute shock and horror rippling through the ultra-wealthy crowd as the screens clearly exposed Lucas's massive, highly illegal network of international bribery, trade fraud, and corporate espionage used to violently sabotage Golden Carousel and monopolize European supply chains. Lucas's smooth, arrogant face instantly drained of all color, turning a sickly, ash gray as his eyes darted frantically across the towering displays, realizing with an agonizing, stomach-churning panic that his entire financial empire and his family's multi-generational reputation were being violently dismantled in front of the most powerful people in the country. Wait, this is a complete fabrication, an illegal hack by a bitter competitor. Lucas screamed into the microphone, his voice cracking with a pathetic, sweating desperation as he looked out at the faces of his elite peers, only to find them drawing back in utter disgust, their previous praise instantly evaporating into a cold, judgmental silence. Jeremy stepped up to the edge of the stage, his gaze piercing through the trembling antagonist as he delivered the final crushing blow. The international trade authorities and federal financial regulators were handed these exact documents 2 hours ago. Lucas, your assets have been frozen, your exclusive supplier contracts have been legally voided for fraud, and the police are currently waiting at the main gates of this estate to arrest you for corporate extortion and bribery. Lucas felt his knees buckle, the absolute humiliation and total ruin crashing down on him on the very stage where he had planned to celebrate his ultimate victory, his hands shaking so violently he dropped his wine glass, the red liquid staining the pristine stage like a symbol of his shattered ego. He looked down at Miranda, opening his mouth to beg for mercy, to apologize, to offer her anything to stop the bleeding. But it was already a lifetime too late. Miranda simply turned her back on him, walking directly toward Jeremy as the entire ballroom erupted into an absolute frenzy of whispers and awe. Justice had not merely been served. It had completely, unforgettably triumphed, unmasking the hollow villain and restoring absolute power to the protagonists in a shocking finale that Banana Island would talk about for decades to come. The aftermath of that fateful night at the charity gala swept through the elite circles of Banana Island with the purging force of a tidal wave, leaving an entirely rewritten social landscape in its wake. For Lucas Bennett, the descent from the absolute pinnacle of inherited luxury to the stark, unforgiving reality of total ruin was swift, public, and merciless, a textbook demonstration of absolute karmic justice. With 48 hours of his public exposure, the asset freeze initiated by international trade authorities locked down his offshore accounts, while federal financial regulators dismantled Bennett Holdings piece by piece to pay off massive penalties and legal settlements. Cast out from the exclusive clubs, abandoned by his sycophantic peers, who couldn't distance themselves fast enough from his radioactive reputation, Lucas found himself stripped of his tailored suits, his luxury SUVs, his coveted waterfront access. He was thoroughly exiled from high society, left to face a grueling legal battle and a lifetime of obscurity, a broken man who had tried to weaponize wealth only to discover that true power belongs to those with unyielding integrity. Golden Carousel, conversely, experienced a magnificent, historic renaissance. With Lucas's fraudulent tracks legally voided, the master artisans of Germany and Austria immediately restored their multi-generational partnership with Miranda. Deeply moved by her resilience and the global spotlight Jeremy's legal defense had shone on their craftsmanship, the brand rapidly evolved from an exclusive estate boutique into a global empire, opening iconic flagship stores in major capital cities, while the signature music-themed toy line created alongside Jeremy became an international sensation, celebrated by educators and elite families worldwide for its genuine artistry and purpose. Yet, the greatest transformation occurred far away from the cameras and the balance sheets, within the quiet, sun-drenched penthouse overlooking the silver expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. Miranda Amando finally allowed her carefully constructed armor to dissolve entirely, realizing that true strength did not mean clenching her fists to maintain absolute control, but having the courage to open her hands and accept a real, unconditional love. She became an unshakable, permanent presence in Clara's life, no longer an unreachable figure of corporate precision, but a source of warmth, laughter, and stability. filling their home with a melody that held no trace of past grief. Jeremy composed his greatest masterpieces in this new era of peace, his music carrying a profound